We'll be reading from Dr. KCV's volume 1 from the chapter Hita or Means and Methods. It's a fairly long article, so probably we'll read half and the remaining half we'll finish it next week. So we'll start now. The importance of Hita or Means and Methods. The importance of a proper method, upasana, to attain the highest state of spirituality is well recognized in all the schools of religion, but it is not so well understood or emphasized in the schools of philosophy. The moral preparation for any curriculum is usually forgotten. Indeed, thanks to the present day tendency, any emphasis on moral preparation or direction is said to produce in the minds of the disciples and students a contrary response, an opposition to discipline. Therefore, directives or commands and imperatives are looked upon as dangerous and provocative and counter responses. Provocative of counter responses. Therefore, it is that moral precepts and other guides to conduct have fallen out of favor in most religious and educational institutions. However, it is clear that no one can progress unless he imposes on himself disciplines and controls which would fit him for the noble tasks ahead. In other words, yama or self-controls are very necessary. They obviate avoidable suffering. They make one free from fear and all types of moral turpitude. They make one self-reliant and submissive to truth, however unpalatable it may appear. If in the modern world freedoms are sought to be assured to man by giving him his living needs, the ancient and eternal law of self-conduct, charya, is willingness to give up needs in order to uphold the truth. The love and kindliness, non-stealth or honesty, and non-robbery and non-profligacy, which are the fivefold sila virtues, the yama. To yield to temptation is to be in mortal fear of death and punishment. Our derelictions are criminal, and the courage of a robber or thief or profligate is a short-lived triumph after all. In the normal development of our life, then, we have to pay heed to the spiritual nature of these sila rather than mere ethical and socio-political codes. Even here, these are important, and no one who has not abjured the wrong path or the fivefold vices can ever attain the highest good or the spiritual. The Upanishad has stated that for one who has not turned away from wrong, na virato duskaritat, there can hardly be the attainment of shanti, peace of mind, nor of the worlds here and hereafter. All spiritual teachers, therefore, specifically prescribe the necessity for good conduct as well as for cleanliness and aspiration to attain peace that comes from above, or for the descent of grace, Ishvara Prasada. In Sri Ramchandra's Rajayoga, Sri Ramchandra shows that once an individual determines to follow the path and is accepted by the Guru, who signifies this by transmitting the superfinest consciousness to him, the sadhana takes on a dynamic aspect. The individual discovers that the qualities so essential, such as sama, sama, dhamma, etc., which can be said to be the sattvika qualities, develop rapidly, and the rajasic characteristics of anger, infatuation, intemperance, and violence, as well as the tamasic characteristics of sloth, ignorance, dejection, rage, and so on, recede or get diminished. This is very similar to what Sri Krishna himself stated, that once the individual has chosen the divine path and goal, he speedily becomes righteous, a Satavastha who moves upwards. The devotee or seeker after divine life begins to find that his devotion becomes the love of God rather than of one's own salvation or liberation. His philosophic insight perceives all reality from the speculum of God rather than from his egocentric vision. All actions take on universal significance and effectuation, and they become cosmic conscious and cease to be private actions seeking little happinesses and pleasures, or such ends as are circumscribed by one's body, community, and interest. So far, it's okay. Any questions, Dharmesh?
No, that's fine. Just little slow.
My speed is faster. I'll slow it down here.
Yeah, little bit would help. Yeah.
Thus, bhakti as love gets transformed into jnana and kriya, and they in turn becomes saturated with devotion and become divine. This naturalness of the change of perspective, vision, feeling, and being is one of the first fruits of the transmission of the Guru. However, it is necessary that the individual should offer himself, desire the ultimate, and surrender completely his person, body, and mind for this experiment with transmission. While the rigors of other practices prevent many from turning towards God, admonished by the Bhagavata, as it were, that those who are beloved of God are precisely to be recognized by the amount of suffering and loss that they suffer in respect of wealth, children, name, fame, and even life. It is clear that Sri Ramchandra's Rajaga doesn't demand heroism or courage in resignation or renunciation. I think this is an important point. People are put off from spirituality because listening the stories of Upanishads and Puranas, they feel that it's they're not fitted for a spiritual life. It is clear that Sri Ramchandra's Rajayoga doesn't demand heroism or courage in resignation or renunciation. On the other hand, it reveals how these losses can be perceived to be blessings, and also how one experiences absolute detachment with regard to these losses. One does not feel their loss. There is no emotional excitement over the matter either. The need to go about telling all about one's resignation or detachment or publicizing the same. The transmission of the Guru's highest superfine consciousness makes all quite natural, appear natural, and not something to either exult or wail over. This is today's diary saying, actually. If you can go to the nuggets, you'll find it there. So he says the transmission of the Guru's highest superfine consciousness makes all quite natural, appear natural, and not something to either exult or wail over. The means adopted for attaining the subtlest state should be subtle. Gross or physical means are of absolutely no help. In fact, they become hindrances. Therefore, one should know the subtlest means. The psychic condition has to be rendered subtle by means of thought about subtlety. The form should be contemplated upon, must be of the subtlest form. The usual tendency is to take up a gross form embellished by ornaments and dresses pleasing to the eye. The highest reality cannot obviously be represented by any physical form, though such a form may be given to some in intuition or revelation. The divine has infinite attributes which are deemed to be auspicious and immeasurable. But the divine has also the quality of transcendence over all these qualities. The ordinary mind might be led through wonder and amazement at the infinite and endless auspicious qualities to the real nature of God, which is transcendent to these, and thus to itself have the transcending quality or nature. Man searching and yearning for reality, after reality, would reach this transcendence, which bodes the possibility of his transcendence over all limitations, albeit excellences. Therefore, the subtlest way is meditation on that subtlest transcendence. For this, it is suggested that the divine should be contemplated upon as the omnipervasive light in the heart. That is to say, the light in the heart should be conceived of as spreading all over, both within the whole organism, from the head to foot, and also outside, spreading to the farthest limits of perception. This conception of the omnipervading reality is most beneficial in developing subtlety of perception and helps the removal of all impurities, obstructions, and coverings on the inner psychic being. Actually, I had a discussion with Revered sir about this point. I said, why are we not telling this point in the training program? And sir said, yes, that we have to tell this to in an advanced course, he said, for people who are abhyasis and who have practiced for a long time. For them, we have to tell this. He says, he told me that we have to tell this to an abhyasi training program. That's what he told me. But this is important. This, I think now, whenever all of us sit, before we start our meditation, we have to conceive. I will read it again because I practice this regularly and it has helped me immensely. For this, it is suggested that the divine should be contemplated upon as the omnipervasive light in the heart. That is to say, the light in the heart should be conceived of as spreading all over, both within the whole organism, from the head to foot, and also outside, spreading to the farthest limits of perception. This conception of the omnipervading reality is most beneficial in developing subtlety of perception and helps the removal of all impurities, obstructions, and coverings on the inner psychic being. This transcendence, which negates all grossness and impurities, dissolves all obstructions and dissipates all coverings, is not hard. The possibility of conceiving the omnipervasive light in the heart or perceiving it from the heart is many times questioned by those who have tried this in meditation. However, this leads to the important point as to whether this can be had out of one's own unaided thought or whether it requires extraneous help. There is no doubt that the extraneous help required for this experience of the omnipervasive reality or light within should be transcendental and subtle. Sometimes the help of this transcendent reality itself has to be sought, for this includes the immanent reality of the individual, and it had through the flow of transcendence into the immanent, bathing it always. This is the experience of grace, peace, and descent that purifies the heart and makes one feel light and subtle. So he raises the question whether individual can mind, which is drowned in grossness, is it capable of conceiving such a kind of a thought and maintaining the thought. He says transmission from such a kind of a subtle state helps in achieving it. That's the service which the trainer renders to the abhyasis actually. In the usual conceptions of Raj Yoga, there are available two steps, namely the physical purifications and disciplines, and the moral regulations and disciplines. The two important physical disciplines are asana and pranayama, the steady sitting posture, which has to be cultivated, and the control of breath by regulating expiration, inspiration, and retention. There are, of course, other schools which expand these sitting postures to include all types of postures, which are said to bring under control almost all the muscles, including those of the heart. There are schools which seek to regulate breath in all possible ways by increasing the times of inspiration or duration of retention and expiration. There are others who would like to develop the art of prediction by noting the inspiration and expiration by the right or left nostril, called the Swara Shastra, science of notes or sounds. You know, the Buddhists actually, totally, they have about 40 objects of meditation. Out of it, one of the method of meditation is called anapanasati. That means watching your breathing, which is inhalation and exhalation process. And they claim that by just being aware of your breathing, you can become realized actually. So even in and if you also see, if you meditate and if your mind is absorbed in divinity, your breathing comes to a stop. There's a clear link between the vrittis, which there's a flow of consciousness, flow of thoughts, and that is linked to the breathing processes. Suppose your mind becomes very quiet, the breathing also becomes very quiet. In fact, it stops also. This is just by the way of comment from my side, but then
generally the pulse rate comes down.
No, the pulse rate I have not measured, but breathing stops.
Okay.
Pulse rate continues. There will be varying changes. There will be variability in pulse rate. Suppose, but breathing stops actually.
Okay.
Pulse stops, then you're going to die actually. You can't live. Whereas the metabolism comes down, you know. We normally, whenever we take a breath, 500 ml breathing is called vital capacity. We breathe in 500 ml, and out of it, 150 ml is wasted in the air pathways itself. That's called dead space. So only when you're deeply meditating, only about 40-50 ml of air comes in and goes out, and that's enough to sustain your metabolism. Metabolism comes down, body metabolism comes down. That's why Babuji says, thinking consumes blood. So when you're thinking, when a person is put in fMRI and if he is asked to think, there's increased rush of blood to certain areas of the brain, which shows that brain is actually working to produce those thoughts and do those activities concerning thought. And he says, in my method, when I ask people to meditate on the heart, thoughts become less, so you consume less blood, so you live longer. That's what he clearly comments in one of those talks. You know, he keeps talking to the Westerners. He says, you consume less blood because less thoughts, so you live longer. In fact, there are certain there are some birds where their heart rate is 1,000 beats per minute and all. They live a very short duration actually. So the amount of, the life is measured in the amount of beats per life actually. So like for us, probably our heart will beat probably some, I don't know, you can calculate 72 into per 1 minute into 60 into 24. That is 1 day. So 1 year in 356. Like that, if you calculate for 70, 80 years, it comes to probably 200-300 crores, or I don't know. You can calculate it. That is a lifespan actually. The other school would insist on the mental control arising from restraint of the senses from running after objects. These are called yama, control, and niyama, regulation. They comprise preparations for moral valuation between truth and untruth, injury and non-injury, stealing and honesty, robbery and charity, continence and incontinence, purity and impurity, godliness and godlessness, and so on. Without moral urge or awakening, there is hardly any possibility of spiritual growth. The ancients prescribed certain minimum conditions for undertaking spiritual work, distinguishing the eternal from the mortal or transient, a seeking for liberation from all bonds and chains, or at least the urge to escape from suffering, bodily, vitally, and mentally, or in the language of the ancients, suffering arising from nature, from oneself and from God's physical, psychological, and theological, Adibhautika, Adhyatmika, and Adidevika. Some other schools had felt that one is unfit for the higher spiritual liberation unless one has renounced the goods of the world and pleasures and profits of the worldly life. Renunciation of all desire and objects of desire is the sine qua non of the spiritual unfoldment or awakening. Great religious teachers like Buddha, Mahavira, Shankara, and others have taught the path of sannyasa, or total abandonment of artha, kama, and in some cases even worldly dharma. Sell all that you have or distribute it and come. Another great guru has said, give everything to your guru and be possessionless. Then are you fit for the great instruction. Such renunciation of wife and children and duties to them is the preliminary condition of any seeker, mumukshu, and it may well be the final condition also. That Vairagya, Mumukshatva, and Nitya, Anitya, Viveka are the requisites is well known, but how to get them established is a very important question. It is said that one can habituate oneself to these, but it is equally recognized that these are precarious acquisitions of the human consciousness. You can think over and then try to forcefully think and try to create that mental state where you know that Nitya, Anitya, Viveka, or renunciation. But those mental states are very precarious. They are very unstable. Anytime they slip away from your mind. But it is equally recognized that these are precarious acquisitions of the human conscience. The view that prevailed for quite a long time is that these could be cultivated by contemplation on the transitoriness of all pleasures, or by the contemplation on the unhappiness consequent on any pleasures getting or pleasure hunting, the paradox of hedonism. Such contemplations help a renunciative mind, but do not create the total withdrawal from the temptations of the world with its wealth and woman. The subtlest egoism, such as love of name, honor, recognition, do gather strength. There is one important fact that the trainers in the art and science of mind control have slurred over. The manas or mind as such is in the human individual conditioned by egoism, both personal and individual. As such, it is indistinguishable from the ego. The dictum that the mind is the cause of both bondage and freedom would be meaningless unless in the former condition as the cause of bondage, it is different from the latter when it is the instrument of freedom and liberation. The explanation of the twin processes of manas has to be sought in its basic nature as the primal thought projected out of the being or reality which has developed the various degrees of grossness or tamas, and which after exhausting this moment returns to its own condition of subtle being or sattva. The mind, therefore, has to be cured of its egoism or individuation towards grossness, and has to be brought more and more into the original condition of subtleness, or at least linked up with that. The grossness or the outer gets impregnated with the inner subtle condition, and they become organic to one another instead of being diversed or divided and distinguished from each other. The process of making this mind sublime or subtle is achieved by restraining the outer gross processes and promoting the subtle processes. This is one way. And the Patanjali Sutra states that yoga is just this restraint of the modifications of the chitta or mind from engaging themselves in the remembrance and retention of outer impressions. As a matter of fact, one who starts this process of restraint of mental modifications would clearly discern his mind itself to be the center and seat or abode of all ideas, an alaya of the vijnana or ideations of all levels, both conscious and unconscious. The yogi is advised to suppress these modifications as they arise or slay them by counter will till one attains the condition of an empty void of all vijnana or ideations and images. This demands absolute self-conscious discernment or vigilance till the condition of a thoughtless mind becomes achieved. This is the bodhi of Buddha, which is the attainment of nirvana, mindlessness. What it is can only be experienced in samadhi, a condition of supreme transcendence of all thought or thought processes. Stilled thought, when thought and reality become one or merge into each other. Perhaps it is this condition that is also equivalent to the merger or union of the individual ego with the Godhead, or perhaps it is a condition beyond all these individuations and generalization. Anything so far?
Just one thing here, right? Patanjali Sutra states that the yoga is just this restraint of the modifications of the chitta or mind from engaging themselves in the remembrance and retentions of outer impressions.
Yeah.
We keep remembering the things like, okay, I had a good food or I saw this and all that, right? So those are the outer impressions.
That immediately strengthens the ego.
Strengthens the ego. Okay. Yeah. So this is
you can never get rid of the ego. Any praise you're having, any recognition seeking from your friends, or that you want to be praised, that you're a good meditator, if that feeling is there, immediately the ego is inflated and then it becomes difficult. So
all these things has to be restrained, ignored, right?
No, you should become simple. You should become plain and simple. Jaise nature mein miljul jave. I mean, you should be plain and simple to be identical with nature. You are part of nature. You're nothing significant in this world. You're part of nature. Generally, we are insignificant. We don't recognize that. So if that is recognized, then you don't give any importance to any of your experiences. It is just a mere experience which comes and goes. You don't hold on to them that that is the self or that is the God. Thoughts are just thoughts. They are just like clouds. They do not belong to you. You're not the owner of those thoughts. And the mistake of a Viveki or an ordinary person is he identifies firmly with his thoughts and feelings. And that is the cause of suffering. A yogi actually detaches himself. He renounces his attachment with thoughts and feelings. So he is liberated actually. So the less you think about yourself, your thoughts and feelings, the more you are towards freedom actually.
So this thought, sir, one second. This thoughtlessness of mind is during dhyana or through the day, all through the day?
No. What happens when you advance in meditation?
Right, sir.
There is what is called, you move into Brahmanda consciousness. In Brahmanda consciousness, especially if you go to 8th knot and all that, there the world, you will have a mental condition of Padma Patra Vimambasa, or just like a drop of water on the leaf of this thing, lotus. It doesn't stick to it, or the fowl or a swan which sinks in the water comes out. Water doesn't stick to it.
Right.
So your mind becomes so balanced that that they don't affect you at all. So when your work with the mind, with the world is over, you're back in your own state of tranquility. Then very few thoughts will be there. Thoughts will be there, but though by the time your yama and yamas are so well established that if at all any thought is coming, it will be only thought about the welfare of making people happy, or the thoughts about the peace and tranquility only you will be feeling. So very little thoughts will be there. Thoughts will come into play when you want to do some action. Like suppose you want to talk about the master, then the thoughts will come. Otherwise, thoughts will be less, very, very less.
Right, sir. Thank you.
Sir, this is suppression, attaining thoughtlessness is not correct. No,
Suppression is like a spring. You try to put the spring down. When you release the tension, the spring will hit back with powerful force. No.
Okay.
All the problems with Catholic priests, just trying to say, I don't want to make judgment about them. They all practice like in the nuns and monks. They try to suppress the sexual feelings. But as long as they're physically healthy and their mind is functioning well, temporarily they are under restraint. But in certain weak spots, that blows up with such force that they indulge in all sorts of, child abuse and all that. Those things happen.
Okay.
That's why, since they are not, they have no access to yoga and they don't have awareness of Babuji's method of point A meditation. They're extremely vulnerable. Ordinary man is much better off than a person who tries to suppress.
Okay.
A person who suppresses is very sick and he's in a very, he's just like sitting on a balcony. Sometime it will erupt and then he'll end up in a lunatic asylum.
Okay.
Very dangerous.
It is
That's
better.
why in the training program, that's why what we say, in one of the slides, it says, don't try to, your sensory desires and all, don't try to suppress, use all your energy thinking about the goal. You try to suppress those lower tendencies, then they'll become strong and you will never succeed. Babuji himself says, Kama and Krodha cannot be eliminated. And then you try to fight with them, even 1,000 years you fight, you are going to lose it. Because they're given by God, you cannot conquer them. You modify them and be at peace with them. Mahajan, samajh mein aaya na? Don't commit this mistake of suppressing yourself.
The counter win is better.
No, use that energy to think about God. You got the power to think about God. Usko soche to bas wo automatically kamzor ho jaye. Just like a plant which is not watered, it will die, no? It will stay for some time, after it will die. That's the system which we talk.
So counter will also implies same thing, no?
Counter will, some of the thoughts which are troubling, you can use the Pratipaksha Bhava. Like suppose you have a resentment or ill will against somebody, then you should immediately counter it by thinking about the 7th commandment or 6th commandment, or then 9 p.m. universal prayer. Let them also enjoy the love of God and then have the peace of mind when mind touches the godly mind. So like that you can make a counter thought, then that thought cannot exist at that time. So one of the method of purifying your mind is Pratipaksha Bhavana. That is what we do know. Anukulya Sankalpa, Pratikulya Savarjanam. What Sir told about SOR, stimulus and response. What happens normally, any stimulus comes, we automatically react. Any thought comes, like you immediately follow that thought and react to that thought. But in between you bring in, the observer. You take time whether I should follow that thought or whether it is worthwhile, by following that thought, by following up on the action, will that take me to the goal? If you put that question, then you know you are developing Viveka. So Viveka can be continuously be developed by every second you are living, you got an opportunity to practice Viveka, and every second is your mind can be purified and you can move towards God actually. Okay, we'll go ahead. This process of the Yogacara is undoubtedly a strenuous one. This conscious process is also counseled by Zen Buddhism, which has found that dhyana is the very condition when one traces the process of descent or grossening or bondage to the gross with its particular experience and transient objects, as well as the ascent of the dhi beyond all objectifications and symbolizations inherent in any attempt to seize the object or the idea or the object idea subjectively. One passes beyond, in, and during the supreme tension of the consciousness, which would make all experiences basically conscious and will not permit any experience to sink into unconsciousness. The consciousness so trained is expected to make transcendence into superconsciousness. Some have claimed this release from egoistic delimitation of consciousness in this higher consciousness, which is utterly different from the unconscious and subconscious. Very technical stuff. If somebody has any problems, we'll discuss later. Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, the very famous Russian mystics. Gurdjieff, I believe, is a realized person who woke up from his, who's got full viveka actually. Gurdjieff and Ouspensky have surely traversed the same path and seen that consciousness itself must undergo a radical change when it is restored to the fourth way without being circumscribed by the paths already made by the men of the first, second, and third ways, namely the mechanical. Gurdjieff talks about fourth ways. So his sir is, Kessian sir is telling the first way is the mechanical, the second is the vital and emotional, and the third is intellectual. The karma, bhakti, and jnana, or the tamas, rajas, and sattva ways. Nor do they counsel the adoption of the physiological and biological chemical ways of arousing forces inherent in the gross system. Hatha Yoga and especially the Kundalini practices have proved difficult, and they considered that the Kundalini produced more difficulties which acted as buffers, preventing one's fullest awareness. It entangled man in imagination and fantasy, whether erotic or otherwise. The volume of literature in the Tantras about this Kundalini or its arising or uplifting through mantra or tantra or yantra is vast and cannot be dismissed lightly. However, the preoccupation with it has produced more deleterious consequences to health, even as the Vyayama utilization of the asanas and pranayama has done. The tendency to mechanicalize all spiritual activity has produced deleterious effects in grossness. As it is said of law, that the letter killeth the spirit, so too habit killeth subtleness and freedom. We'll not go into this, it'll lead into so many discussions. We'll just take whatever points are useful for us. The attempt to establish a correlation of the yoga angas with the three attitudes of bhakti, karma, and jnana has been quite fruitful. The great Ramanuja equated bhakti with the yoga angas, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. The several acts of worship were intended to illustrate the processes of yoga. The Agama methods of puja had emphasized the importance of control of seat, breath and mind, and also the necessity of goal, direction, moral cleanliness, and physical purity. Similarly, Karma Yoga insists on the strict, detached performance of works according to Dharma, which leads not only to purification of mind, but develops that one-pointedness of purpose in doing one's duty, which is almost so intense on certain occasions as to stimulate samadhi, engrossment. Similarly, also is Jnana Yoga, when it leads up to that perception of oneness of the ego with the ultimate self, be this construed as its body or power or part, or even a complete losing of itself in its deepest moments of absorption, dhyana or tanmaya. All these methods are counseled, but the primary one is the condition of surrender, or self-giving or offering to the ultimate. This condition prepares for all the rest. So much so, Acharyas of the path of realization had insisted on seeing the individual and his condition of preparedness to surrender himself, his ego, his possessions, and all, including life itself, to the will and guidance of the master. This is not as ridiculous as it might seem. Most individuals do sign away their lives or execute a bond or give an undertaking not to bring any action against the doctor if the patient dies on the operation table or as a consequence of it under any circumstances. The doctor gets immunity from prosecution if the case goes wrong or death ensures. Similarly, the individual must be willing to run the risk of complete dependence and reliance on the master or guru in his spiritual efforts. This total or integral surrender, prapadana or prapatti, alone makes for the evolution of the individual and gives meaning and power to the practices of bhakti, karma, and jnana. This is what Sri Krishna has emphasized in the famous concluding advice: give up all dharma, surrender to me. I shall save you from all sins. Do not grieve. The exclusive devotion and belief in the power and wisdom of the master or God is the essential feature of faith. It transmutes itself into love as it matures, which means a total self-giving to the beloved even up to death. Life becomes unbearable without the presence of and union with the beloved, the master or God. This important aspect of the spiritual dedication cannot be developed through habit of mind or even by tendencies developed by constant reiteration or performance. As we know full well, the most emotional observances cool down into arid habits. Meaning seems to get lost in the doing of acts, even of conscientious charity and reasoning. Thus, a spiritual attitude is a thing that tends to preserve this meaningfulness and spontaneity that grows out of superconscious nature, and never does it sink into unconsciousness. Religious practices are more often ritual habits of mind and body, as it was later shown to be in the case of tantras or mudras. Sophisticated symbolisms which demand exposition and explanation that have to be preserved in traditional ways in order to be remade significantly. Much of our myths and practices are, even like dramatic art or dance, frozen symbolisms which could be understood only when their symbolisms are expounded. This varies from culture to culture and from religion to religion. Spiritual practices, or on the other hand, serious spiritual movements and actions which release the pent-up forces in the matter and materialization, or symbols and symbolisms concealed in tantras, mantras, yantras, and mudras. It is because of their compelling dynamism that they restore life to all these and show the upward movement, which unfortunately has got arrested or obstructed by these intermediary knots of thought and action and habits of reference. Traditional explanations, however valuable in one sense, also hinder clarity and simplicity of the rites, rituals, and symbolisms. Therefore, the means to be adopted should be such as can never degenerate into meaningless and sophisticated habits. They should constantly enlarge the range of consciousness and make it more and more universalized. They should dynamically restore the original superconscious impulse which has led to the creative evolution of the entire organism, as well as the cosmos, of which the organism is a part and manifestation, which is a whole, even like the cause, and responds to the meaning and force of the whole within it. The difference within yoga and the traditional practices was so immediate in me and in some of my friends that when we took the introduction and the transmission was given, the unfolding of wisdom was so spontaneous, we never felt like going to a temple at all, never felt like doing any rituals at all. It is very dynamic. You will break free from all superstitions and rituals and formal practices actually. Thus, in the normal method of creative evolution and renewal of the spiritual, what is most requisite is the dynamic awareness of the influx and the interpenetration of that super consciousness in the very fibers and cells and atoms of our body and of the world. The special means adopted by Sri Ramchandra's Raj Yoga ensure that this is not merely a theoretical probability, but a practical achievement. The super consciousness is introduced into the individual's heart by the guru or preceptor, who has been made, as it were, an instrument for this purpose by the divine. We know of the instances in mystical experience and history of this type of direct initiation by masters who were endowed with this power of transmission. In our times, this was said to have been utilized by Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Aurobindo had always held that divine grace must descend into one in order that the individual may grow in the light of that grace. There have been some cases where this seems to have taken place, but there is also a large difference between one kind of force and another. This leads us to inspect the results of each case of initiation. What is the kind of consciousness or level of being introduced by the descent of grace or influx or transmission? This is a serious question for all of us to ponder. We have to put, he's asking us to put this question. This leads us to inspect the results of each case of initiation. What is the kind of consciousness or the level of being introduced by the descent of grace or influx or transmission? If it is merely leading up to a change or conversion that leads to a break away from social and other ties and grants renunciation of all worldly hopes and ends and goals, it is one type. If it leads to clinging to the object which has made this renunciation of all other things except itself possible, it is a more positive awareness of a sense of values and discrimination. But if it is a quickening of the process of self-awareness and evolution and widening of the frontiers of understanding, it is a third way. If it leads to the abolition of all flickering of thought, of all thoughts, and a settled experience of peace and calm, which are beyond the limits of our understanding and capacity, it is a deeper level of awareness. What we seek is this ultimate peace by itself, without waiting on or instrumented by renunciation, intellectual discrimination, or a sense of quickened activity and intelligence, and a sense of push towards the goal of humanity or man. Sri Aurobindo states that the descent of Chit Shakti is the sine qua non of evolution, and the Divine Mother will descend and transform the individual once the individual surrenders integrally to the Divine Mother or Master. Samadhi conditions or trance states are also said to be bestowed on worthy disciples by certain yogis. And in fact, trance is considered to be absolutely necessary on the path of Kundalini Yoga. Sometimes trance conditions are sought as if they are ends in themselves. And when used, drugs, emotional movements, constant repetition of names, dramatizations, dances, and rites in order to get that oblivious condition. These are encouraged by certain schools of devotion, but the strain that they put on the human organism is great and turns out to be injurious to the system. Austerity, penance, fasting, and other privations do produce certain conditions which help visions and dreams, but these are mistaken for realities. Indeed, it was the fear of these visions and dreams, bordering on hallucinations, that led some serious sadhakas to view that the ultimate reality is beyond all and is qualityless, formless, and so on, and is felt only as a pure consciousness and pure being. So it appears that transmission, though it was known and given in certain cases, was not utilized for the purpose of liberation and attainment of the ultimate reality state continuously, nor was it the super consciousness, the ultimate itself, that was so transmitted. A lesser than the ultimate consciousness would only bring about a precarious change of levels, which would not stay long. Only a single transmission could not bring about a total change of nature unless it was capable of bringing about or setting into motion all processes so as to bring about real change, bring about total change in due course, or unless it ignites the inner core of an already evolved being so as to bring about a series of changes culminating in the permanent attainment of the ultimate. The unique point of the method propounded by Sri Ramchandraji is that the means by which human divinization could take place is only transmission of the ultimate consciousness, which continuously and without breakdown leads to complete realization or divinization of the human personality. It is the only force that could do it, according to him. Not even the supermind of Sri Aurobindo could do it, nor is there anyone who could handle that force so as to be able to transmit it to every seeker seriously engaged in the problem of being. The transmission, once established consistently and continuously, immediately links up the Abhyasi with the Guru at the highest level and demands nothing that is impossible for man. On the other hand, the Abhyasi finds that he is being endowed day by day with all those conditions which other yogas prescribe as the preliminary conditions for initiation: renunciation, surrender, devotion, discrimination, faith, lightness of being, fearlessness, all seem to grow with the transmission without any effort on the part of the ego. One seems to pass beyond the dualities, dvandas, infatuation with society and its values, resignation into the hands of God, dependence on the divine, a feeling that one is verily the body of God and God alone seems to get established. One discerns that light, which is the source of all light, that mind, which is the source and cause of all minds and thoughts of several levels and degrees of grossness. The continued experience of peace within, lightness, and a peculiar means by which the knots of distress that encompass an individual seems to get dissolved or loosened are the most important results of superconscious transmission of the master or of his representative. It is well known that the chain of gurus is more or less continuous in all religious institutions, but it is also well known that the powers of transmission which some of these gurus possess in some measure are not exercised by their successors in office. Thus, we find that successors, as a rule, endeavor to copy the ritual or forms adopted by their predecessors or gurus, and we find that there is more emphasis on the letter and form rather than the act of transmission itself. This snapping of continuity determines the fall in standards of spirituality in sects and religious institutions, not to speak of all institutions in general. I think we'll stop here. Since it's a fairly long article, we'll continue in the next Sunday reading session.
Yeah. Any comments, questions anyone wants to? Right.
The carry-on point is you can, before you start meditation, you can conceive of divinity, divine light as the subtlest thing, which is divine light without luminosity. And it is spreading from head to toe. It is percolated to every cell of your body. And also it is diffusing out of your body into the surrounding air, into the surrounding tables and carpets and into all the trees and into the space beyond and into all the birds which are flying or into the earth and into the ocean and everything. It is spread there. And then start training your mind to stay on that location and let it rest on that subtle object of meditation. That is the point which is important actually. Unless it is done properly, you will not really enjoy meditation. Anybody else want to talk? Or this is a Bodanti Parasparam, unless people share their experiences and talk or raise issues of understanding, then only we can learn from each other, and then we can learn from, the understanding unfolds from within us, and then it will help us in our sadhana actually. If we don't read such books and if we feel that we already read, we know everything, then we are closing the doors of spiritual evolution actually.
There is one sentence, the consciousness should be super consciousness. One sentence where we said we'll come back to that. Can we go back to that sentence?
Paragraph starting with
I think Russian.
The consciousness so trained is expected to make transcendence into superconscious, somehow claimed egoistic delimitation of conscious, which is utterly different from unconscious and subconscious. What does it, some clarity on this?
Which one? What do you want?
this one. The consciousness
Is so trained is expected to make transcendence into superconsciousness, somehow claim this release of egoistic delimitation of consciousness in this higher conscious, which is utterly different from unconscious and subconscious. What does it?
पूरा paragraph पढ़ो देखेंगे. Go back to the.
Okay. So this process of Yogacara is undoubtedly a strenuous one. This conscious process is also counseled by Zen Buddhism. The Satori of Zen Buddhist appears to be the Satori, the enemy of the breath that brings about rebirth, which was said to have been discovered by Saint Satori Shatokapa of Sri Vaishnavism. This Zen was exported to Japan by a monk of Kanchi, which has found that dhyana is very condition when one traces the process of descent or grossing or bondage to the gross with its particular experience and transient objects, as well as the ascent of thee beyond all objectifications and symbolizations inherent in any attempt to seize the object or the idea or object idea subjectively. One passes beyond, in and during this supreme tension of consciousness, which would make all experiences basically conscious and will not permit any experience to sink into unconsciousness. This consciousness, so trained, is expected to make transcendence into superconsciousness. Some have claimed this release from egoistic delimitation of consciousness in this higher consciousness, which is utterly different from the unconscious and subconscious.
So this is actually this is a process of yoga. Actually, yoga, you must understand that we are talking of the presence of Purusha or the divinity, which is the base for the mind actually. And the mind is composed of this chitta stuff, which is made of sattva, raja and tamoguna. So, and mind also has got sense organs. And the external world or universe, which you think is externally, actually is also made of sattva, raja and tama. And we are merged in that world. So what happens when you are meditating, when you are resting your mind on the all-pervasive subtle divinity in the heart, and when that link gets established, the vibrations which are present in that godly presence, if at all you want to call it as vibration, which are the subtlest reality, then they, through the bridge of thought which you linked it to the during meditation, by linking it, by thinking you're linking yourself with God actually. So through that link, the vibrations of divinity will come into your mind, and then gradually what happens, the mind itself vrittis will calm down, and then there is what is called nirodha samadhi happens. That means the outgoing thoughts become temporarily stopped, and there will be a quietening down of the mind. And if you continue to practice, what happens, the further transformations take place in the mind. That is again called what is called samadhi parinama and ekagrata parinama. And ekagrata parinama comes, your mind gets what is called one-pointed capacity. That means it is oblivious to anything. Just like he describes in the second commandment prayer, he says the world becomes an afterthought. You become blind to the charms of the world. I mean, just when a person is in deep sleep, no sensory information comes in and the mind is inactive. In the same way, yogi, the world becomes dead actually, and then all his attention is on the divinity. When that thing happens, then a kind of a layavastha or emergence happens, a samadhi happens, and then he starts living in that state. That is a balanced condition. That is what Babuji says, you live in the consciousness of God itself. From that state, all these things will not happen. The consciousness so trained to live in the consciousness of master, expected to make transcendence into super consciousness. That means you move beyond space and time, you live in a condition which is beyond space and time. Some have claimed if space and time is not there, objects which is nothing but a which a construction of your mind, we are actually living in a three-dimensional simulated world actually. Just like if you see certain three-dimensional cinema halls are there, you go there, you put on a goggles, you feel you are in a world. In fact, our real experience of this water bottle or this computer is they are just appearances which are created by mind and projected outside. And with the mind, in mind, it's a vritti, it's a thought or a cognition happens. It's a perception only is the reality. And when the mind perceives God, at that time, it cannot perceive the worldly objects. So it has transcended the limits. So it has transcended space and time itself. So that's what actually happens if a person is meditating seriously. Some have claimed the release from the sense of that you are a doer is actually a twist or a foreign body, like suppose in my blood, if I inject some bacteria into my body, I'll get fever and all that. So that is not my normal state. So feeling that you are the agent doing things and then the thoughts belong to you, that the body belongs to you and you own the body and you own the house and you own the cell phone and watch and all that, that is called ego. That ego is actually a disease or a grossness or a dirt which is put on your face or something like that. You wash it off, it goes away. So when your mind merges in God, this egoistic dissolves actually. And once this egoism dissolves, then your problem is solved. Then you are no more subject to unconscious and subconscious habit patterns, or you transcended the world itself. You tattvamasi, then you realize that you are nothing but God only. So it's a very technical language has been used, but it's the experience of all yogis. Many of us, people who are meditating seriously, have this experience.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So we'll meet next Sunday then.